The planet Verdant 3 was, by all galactic accounts, unremarkable. A tidy green orb tucked along the edge of human-colonized space, it boasted mild weather, fruit-bearing trees that didn't try to kill anyone, and a small population of colonists with a fondness for rustic living and deep space radio dramas. For this reason alone, the Grivern Consortium considered it a perfectly safe location for their first formal survey presence in human territory. That, and humans had not shot at them yet. That part seemed important. Survey Commander Krex, a tall, hairless reptiloid with impeccable posture and a fondness for ceremonial sashes, stepped out of his shuttle onto the soil of Verdant 3 with the smug confidence of someone who had definitely not read the fine print. His diplomatic aide, a nervous avian creature named Pliv, waddled behind him, chirping into a datapad as if afraid the wind might erase his notes. The shuttle's cargo hatch hissed open, revealing an assortment of survey drones and, more ominously, automated security units. Krex squinted at the waiting humans, a cluster of farmers, children, and one bored-looking deputy sipping from a thermos, and smiled. Or, rather, he attempted what his species believed was a smile. It involved the retraction of his lower mandibles and the puffing of his upper neck folds. To human eyes, it looked like someone trying to swallow a chair. "Greetings, sentient mammals," Krex intoned, his voice slick with the kind of condescension that only emerges from generations of bureaucratic superiority. "We come in peace. And profit." The humans applauded. One of the children asked if the tall lizard man could breathe fire. Another tried to touch Pliv's feathers. For all intents and purposes, the landing was a success. Over the next 48 hours, the Grivern survey team established a perimeter around their designated observation and minor exploitation zone, a phrase which, when translated into human trade tongue, unfortunately came out as mild resource looting. Still, the colonists seemed unbothered. Some even offered the aliens pie. It was on the third day that Tommy and Leo Voss went missing. They were 7 and 9 years old, respectively, and in possession of all the qualities that made human children simultaneously adorable and deeply inconvenient: curiosity, mobility, and a profound disregard for posted signage. The sign in question, "Do not enter, Class 3 security area," was posted in 6 languages and accompanied by a holographic frowny face. Tommy had declared it looked like their teacher on report card day. Leo agreed, then dared Tommy to sneak past it. To be fair, it wasn't entirely their fault. The security field had a mild flicker, and the path behind it led directly to what could only be described as a glowing alien snack dispenser. The children, armed with a mutual sense of adventure and absolutely zero understanding of diplomatic immunity, slipped inside. The Grivern internal logs recorded what happened next with chilling efficiency. 2. Unidentified bipedal lifeforms enter restricted corridor. 5. Lifeforms attempt to interface with sustenance unit, unauthorized. 7. Security system activates. 8. Lifeforms neutralized. 10. Corridor sterilized. 12. Report autologged. Incursion resolved. Pest-level intruders neutralized. It wasn't until later, when Pliv reviewed the footage for classification, that he realized the pests were children. Human children. Smiling, laughing, wide-eyed children with jelly-covered fingers and stolen alien snack bars. He made a noise not dissimilar to a choking accordion, and immediately flagged the file. "Commander," Pliv said, his beak twitching, "we may have made an oops." Krex didn't even glance up from his beverage. "A what?" "An oops. Grave diplomatic miscalculation. I believe we have killed 2 human spawn." That made Krex look up. Spawn? How important are human offspring again? There was a long pause. Pliv pulled up several cultural profiles, all of which seemed to suggest that humans placed a shockingly high emotional value on progeny. More than most species placed on rare minerals. "Well?" Krex asked. I think it's bad. Very bad. Sir, the mother." "What of her?" Pliv hesitated. "The maternal identifier on the file is Elia Voss." Krex narrowed his lidless eyes. "The same Voss as—" "Yes." The room was silent. "That Voss," Krex said slowly, Is supposed to be in retirement. Off the grid. Farming goats or some such mammalian nonsense. Well, it appears she is not only not off the grid, Pliv said faintly, but had installed her children on this grid. Krex downed his drink in one long swallow and muttered something untranslatable, though the universal translation algorithm labeled it simply profanity. Well, Krex said after a long silence, this is why we have protocols. We file a formal apology. Offer reparations. Perhaps a tribute goat. Humans still like those, yes? Sir, the children were. Yes, yes, Krex said, waving a clawed hand. I know what we did. But one must consider scale. Perspective. I once accidentally vaporized a royal egg cluster on Ultron Prime. That only cost us 2 shipping lanes and a statue. This will be fine. Pliv opened his beak to protest, but a low chime interrupted him. An incoming message. From Earth. Krex straightened. Ah! Efficient. Let's hear their terms. The message played on the holopad. 3 words, plain font, unencrypted. You should run. Silence. Perhaps, Pliv said softly. We should, indeed. Krex stared at the words, a slow unease crawling down his spine. No. No, this is classic human bravado. They're bluffing. We apologize, send a few credits, maybe a poem. They'll cry. We'll express sorrow. Then we move on. But sir, Pliv whispered, voice barely audible, what if they're not bluffing? The next few hours passed in a haze of frantic diplomatic drafting. Apologies were crafted with care and hastily translated into Earth Standard. A bouquet of synthetic flowers was 3D printed. Someone wrote a formal poem titled Ode to Fallen Innocence, which made at least one intern cry. By nightfall, a diplomatic courier was en route to Earth with a live delegation on board. Meanwhile, the colony of Verdant 3 remained quiet. Too quiet. Krex walked the now-sealed corridor where the incident had taken place. He stared at the smooth, sterilized floor. Not even a smear remained. Efficient, as always. Still, something tugged at him. A memory. An old diplomatic file he'd skimmed years ago. It was a story, he thought. Or perhaps a warning. A tale passed among veterans of interspecies negotiations. About a human general so cunning, so ruthless, that her name was used to frighten unruly recruits. He remembered the final line, delivered with hushed reverence. If you ever kill one of hers, pray she finds you before Earth does. Behind him, the lights flickered. By morning, the first signs arrived. Verdant 3's orbital sensors detected subtle anomalies, microgravitational ripples inconsistent with natural movement. The kind that suggested something large had just dropped out of faster-than-light, and then disappeared. No heat signatures. No mass readings. Invisible. Silent. Present. Krex dismissed it as a glitch. Pliv didn't sleep that night. Hours later, a small drone captured footage of an unknown object placed at the foot of the Grivern Embassy's perimeter gate. It was shaped like a child's toy, a hand-carved wooden block. On it, burned into the wood with surgical precision, were 2 names. Tommy. Leo. Underneath, in tiny etched text, they were 7 and 9. The footage was never officially released. Pliv made sure of that. But within hours, everyone on Verdant 3 knew. The colony fell silent. The humans stopped smiling. The next morning, a single human stood outside the Grivern Embassy. A woman, dressed in civilian clothing. Her stance was relaxed, hands tucked behind her back, her eyes obscured by simple sunglasses. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply waited. Krex watched her from the command tower and felt, for the first time in his career, something new. It was not fear. It was something colder. Something deeper. The calm before the extinction-level event. The woman turned, as if sensing his gaze, and smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the kind of smile an apex predator gives just before the first strike. The diplomatic courier ship arrived at Earth the following day. They docked at the appointed station, bowed, recited their lines, and presented their offerings. The humans accepted it all with polite nods and warm tea. No one mentioned Verdant 3. No one had to. As the delegation left, one of the human officials, an older man in a pressed uniform with a slight limp, turned to them with a gentle tone. "Safe travels, Ambassador. Oh, and if you see Commander Krex again, do remind him." He paused. "There are some debts that aren't paid in credits." The ambassador smiled, albeit nervously. "Of course. We deeply regret the—" The human held up a hand. "No regrets. Not anymore. Just consequences." The Grivern diplomatic vessel Promise of Accord entered Earth space with shields up and weapons down, which was the galactic equivalent of arriving at someone's house with cookies while carrying a white flag in your teeth. The crew had rehearsed their lines 6 times in transit, twice more after detecting what they thought was a passive scan from an unknown Earth orbital, and once again when someone found out humans had started naming their war AIs after maternal family members. No one had slept. Ambassador Tane, a 6-foot-tall mantis-like creature with shimmering carapace plating and a talent for dramatic speeches, stood before the ship's view panel, practicing his best, grief-sincere but not legally incriminating, expression. He'd been assigned this task not because of his skill but because every other senior diplomat had called in sick, retired, or, accidentally, launched themselves out an airlock. "This is fine," he muttered, grooming his antennae. "We have gifts. We have prepared words. We have done nothing irreparable." Behind him, his assistant, a gelatinous creature named Velo, gurgled uncertainly. "Unless General Voss defines irreparable differently than the standard galactic lexicon." Tane twitched. "Let's not dwell on definitions." Earth's response to their diplomatic approach had been remarkably civil. Coordinates to a planetary docking station, instructions for customs processing, and a single-page itinerary. No threats. No demands. Not even a formal complaint. It was unnerving. "Perhaps," Tane said hopefully, "humans are more forgiving than we feared." He would regret those words within the hour. They were greeted planetside by a single escort vehicle. Sleek, unarmed, civilian-grade, and driverless. Inside, calming music played. Some old Earth melody involving banjos and heartbreak. The Grivern found it oddly distressing. The ride took them through rural terrain. Fields of wheat. Forests lined with birdsong. At one point, a squirrel darted in front of the car and lived, which Velo took as a sign of divine mercy. The vehicle finally stopped at a country cottage surrounded by apple trees. A small sign hung on the fence. "Voss family property. Trespassers will be discussed politely." Ambassador Tane was halfway through mentally translating the sign when the front door opened. A woman stepped out. Human. Tall. Mid-40s by visual estimate. Wore a simple linen shirt, hair tied back, hands relaxed. A civilian, by all appearances, until she smiled. The ambassador bowed. "Greetings. I am Tane of Grivern. We come to express our most profound regrets." "Tea?" she interrupted. Tane blinked. "I beg pardon?" "I made a pot. Chamomile. Settles the nerves." She gave a warm, practiced smile and gestured inside. "Let's get you comfortable before you start apologizing." Velo emitted a soft gloop of confusion but followed. The interior of the house was almost aggressively cozy. Wooden floors. Handmade quilts. Family photos. A fireplace that wasn't currently lit, but still managed to radiate a vague sense of judgment. Everything about it screamed harmless. Which, Tane was beginning to suspect, was the point. The woman, Ms. Voss, she'd introduced herself, poured tea for each of them. Her hands were steady. Too steady. "So," she said after a sip, "tell me about the accident." Tane opened his datapad, voice carefully measured. There was a systems oversight. Protocols engaged. 2. He hesitated. 2 of your offspring entered a restricted zone. They were not identifiable to our security units. It was swift. Painless. She nodded slowly. "Do you know what happens to a human body under a Class 3 Grivern sterilization field?" Velo shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Tane cleared his throat. It was not our intention to cause harm. And on behalf of the Grivern, we are prepared to offer compensation. Tribute. A diplomatic pardon. I didn't ask what you're offering, she said softly. I asked if you know what happens. A pause. Atomization, she answered for them. Not even ashes. Nothing left to bury. Nothing to hold. Tane swallowed. We deeply regret. Of course you do, she said, standing. Walk with me. They followed her outside, into the orchard. It was early evening now. The sun was golden, low on the horizon. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where every root and stone was buried. At the far end of the orchard was a swing. Small. Wooden. Recently oiled. It creaked gently in the breeze. My youngest built this last year, she said. He wanted it to go higher, but I told him the higher you go, the further the fall. He said, that's the point. Tane said nothing. She turned to him, eyes calm. You came here thinking this was about grief. Tane hesitated. It is not. No, she said. This is about understanding. She gestured to the trees. Do you know what humans do when someone hurts our young? Tane searched for the diplomatic answer and found none. We were hoping for forgiveness. You were hoping I was someone else. She turned back to the house. Let me show you something. Inside, she led them to a room tucked at the back. It wasn't locked. It didn't have to be. It was full of trophies, military commendations, black and white photographs, old weapons. A sword, sharpened to a monomolecular edge, hung above the desk. This is my past, she said. I gave it up because my children needed a mother, not a myth. And for a while, that was enough. Tane glanced at a datapad mounted on the wall. It was still active, displaying security feeds from orbit. He saw at least 12 unidentified objects in low orbit. No energy signatures. No identification beacons. Are those Earth vessels? No, she said. They're mine. Velo made a small squeaking sound. Tane took a careful breath. General Voss, with all due respect. She held up a hand. Let's not do that part. I'm not going to harm you. Not today. This isn't a retaliation meeting. Tane felt momentarily relieved. Until she continued. This is a reconnaissance. The temperatures seemed to drop. I wanted to see what the Grivern would send. If they'd send soldiers. Or fools. I got fools. She smiled again. That's helpful. Tane stood, gently placing his tea down with both hands. General Voss, the Grivern government did not intend. Intentions are for civilians, she said. Results are for generals. You exterminated my bloodline. You erased my family tree down to the roots. And then you came here with tea and a poem. Her eyes didn't change. Not once. Do you think I'm angry? Tane couldn't speak. I'm not, she continued. Anger clouds judgment. No, Ambassador. I'm planning. Strategizing. Because what you did wasn't just a mistake. It was an opportunity. Velo leaned in, whispering frantically. Tane, we should go. We need to leave now. Outside, the orchard lights flickered on. Voss turned to the window. I used to be feared. Galaxies whispered my name like a curse. Then I walked away. I chose peace. Tane barely found his voice. And now? I remember why peace needs teeth. There was no rage in her tone. Just something deeper. Something older. The sound of winter soil turning under a shovel. The drive back to their shuttle was silent. No music this time. Just the hum of the engine and the oppressive weight of unsaid words. As the ship lifted off, Tane looked down at the cottage. The woman hadn't moved. She stood by the swing, watching them go. He didn't realize until they were halfway to orbit that she was standing at attention. An old military salute. One used at funerals. When the ship re-entered Grivern space 2 days later, Tane filed his report. He sanitized the language, omitted the tremors in his hands, and concluded with the only advice he could reasonably offer. Do not engage Earth. Do not provoke General Voss. Consider the matter closed at all costs. It was ignored. And somewhere deep in a buried command silo, an old war AI powered on. It purred in binary. Data flowed. Protocols engaged. Operation Cradlefire began a soft countdown, masked behind civilian satellites and long-forgotten orbital toys. Voss sat at her kitchen table, a cup of cooling tea beside her. Her fingers traced the edge of a photograph. Two boys. Gap-toothed grins. Arms slung over each other's shoulders. She didn't cry. Not anymore. She simply whispered their names. And waited. The secure doors of Earth Strategic Command hadn't opened in 7 years. No one spoke of it. It wasn't policy. It was fear. Some rooms are better left dark, and some systems should remain cold, especially when those systems had once ended entire planetary regimes in the span of a coffee break. But then someone activated the key. There was no alarm. No fanfare. Just a quiet acknowledgement from a dormant network buried beneath the crust of Earth. Authorization recognized, Voss. 14 defense satellites aligned themselves simultaneously. At the same moment, 6 Terran listening posts received the same encoded transmission. A single glyph, known only to command-level personnel. The general is active. General Elia Voss stood in what had once been a goat barn, now converted with the obsessive precision of a master tactician into an underground war room. The goats had been relocated without protest, as if they knew something was coming. Animals were good at sensing storms. The lights flickered into a steady hum. Screens activated. Old systems, long assumed decommissioned, greeted her like old friends. She didn't smile. Not yet. Commander Briggs arrived with a sack of apples in one arm, and a pulse sidearm holstered lazily on his hip. He bit into an apple without waiting for permission, and dropped into a chair that clearly didn't belong to him. You know, he said, chewing. You have a very specific way of grieving. She didn't look up from the console. Everyone copes differently. Some people cry. Some people drink. You rearm an orbital death grid. Efficient, she said. Briggs tossed her an apple. She caught it without looking. The two had served together on more battlefields than either cared to count. Where Voss brought ruthless precision, Briggs brought sarcasm and stubborn resilience, like a wisecracking sledgehammer. Any movement? He asked. Yes, she said. The Grivern have recalled 3 ambassadorial vessels. They've also moved their deep space merchant fleets into defensive formation. Which means they're scared. Which means they're smart, she corrected. She tapped a key. The projection changed to display a rotating schematic of Grivern Sector Command. Ports, supply lines, defense platforms. Next to it, a countdown timer ticked down in pale red numbers. Briggs raised an eyebrow. 72 hours? That's how long it'll take for them to prepare for a counterstrike. Or call in allies. You planning to hit them before they flinch? No, she said. I'm planning to let them know I flinched first. Briggs leaned back, contemplative. You want them to think this is reactionary. She nodded. I want them thinking this is emotion. Revenge. They'll brace for irrational behavior, which makes them predictable. While you stay very, very rational. For now. Briggs finished the apple and dropped the core into a compost chute. You ever wonder if maybe, just maybe, this is an opportunity to do it different? She gave him a look that could dent titanium. They killed children, Briggs. My children. He looked away. I know. I know you. That's the problem, she said. They don't. Elsewhere, far across human territory, the alien coalition was already fragmenting. The Volari, a serpentine species with an ancient memory and older grudges, had called an emergency convocation. Admiral Chixta coiled on the central dais, his emerald scales dulled with age and unease. His voice echoed in the chamber, deep and deliberate. She has awakened, he said. The others hissed and muttered. Some scoffed. Surely, a delegate rasped. You don't mean to invoke that name. Chixta fixed him with a stare. I watched her break a moon once. Not metaphorically. Literally. She used physics like a paintbrush. She is one human, another argued. She is not a human, Chickasaw replied. She is the one they all learned from. When humans first became dangerous, she taught them how to hide it behind smiles. Murmurs. Warnings. Talk of sanctions. Do not issue threats, Chickasaw warned. Issue apologies. Issue reparations. But do not, ever, issue ultimatums. That is how you find out what the humans buried beneath their flower beds. Silence. Then one quiet voice from the shadows. But the children were not meant to die. Chicksaw's eyes narrowed. It doesn't matter. You killed something a human mother loved. That's not a breach of protocol. That's a spiritual crime. He coiled tighter. And now, they will teach us what mourning looks like in the human tongue. Back on Earth, Voss activated the next protocol. The terminal requested vocal confirmation. Say phrase for Operation Validation. She took a breath. Operation Cradlefire, she said. Initiate silent mode. The room dimmed. The network activated. From dormant silos, 100 autonomous platforms pinged Earth Command with full operational readiness. Somewhere in the asteroid belt, an old Terran stealth cruiser powered on, its AI humming softly, recognition syncing with Voss's voice sprint. Grandma system, online. Welcome back, dear, the AI said, her voice that of a kindly older woman. It's been a while. Voss smiled faintly. I need you sharp. I always am. Would you like something warmed? Not yet. Then I'll begin the knitting. The euphemism meant orbital strike pattern mapping. Grandma was programmed during the early Earth-Trellix Wars, when humanity had learned that war wasn't won with bigger bombs, but with better timing. The AI calculated death like it was setting a dinner table. She was a masterpiece of manners and malice. Briggs watched the lights change on the console, and gave a low whistle. So what's the actual play here? We don't hit their capital. That's what they're protecting. We don't hit their colonies either. That's what they expect. So? We hit the things they don't protect, she said. The things they think no one would bother targeting. Like? She brought up a map. Trade depots. Relay hubs. Supply caches. The arteries of civilization. Not vital organs, but hit enough of them and the body bleeds out. Briggs gave a half-smile. Slow death. Slow lesson, she said. Fast deaths don't educate. He looked at her for a long moment. Do you ever wonder, he asked, if you'd be this dangerous even if they hadn't taken your kids? She didn't answer. On Verdant 3, the Grivern outpost had been vacated under the pretense of infrastructure recalibration. The reality was simpler. They were running. And even that wasn't fast enough. They left behind a sterile building, still humming with residual energy, and a datapad that had failed to erase its logs. The log showed the children's last recorded moments, captured in brutal efficiency. Voss watched it once. Then once more. Then she deleted it from the system, from the backups, and from memory storage. She didn't want it preserved. She wanted it paid for. A message pinged from High Command. It read, General, standing orders prohibit civilian-led engagements. She sent back a single response. Then promote me. The approval came through in 47 seconds. There was no name signed at the bottom. Just an old insignia. A black star inside a circle of laurel. Briggs chuckled when he saw it. They're that scared, huh? No, she said. They're that relieved. 2 days before launch, she walked the orchard one last time. The trees were blooming. The swing creaked gently in the wind. She touched it, her fingers brushing the worn rope. For a moment, she was still. Then she heard the sound of footsteps. A young soldier stood at the fence line, breathless, uniform still creased from new issue. General Voss? He asked. They said you. I mean, are you really leading the strike? She nodded. He looked unsure. Do we have a plan? We are the plan, she said. He swallowed hard. Do we win? She considered the question. No, she said at last. We remind them what it costs to win against us. He saluted. She didn't return it, only nodded. Salutes were for show. She didn't need symbols anymore. She had cause. As he turned to leave, she called out. What's your name, soldier? Parker, ma'am. Just Parker. Well, Parker, she said. Tell your people to keep their heads low. We're about to raise the galaxy's expectations. At 0400, Earth time, the fleet launched. No speeches. No national anthems. Just a silent slipstream surge, like shadows cast in reverse. Civilian traffic went on as usual. News broadcasts mentioned nothing. But those who watched the stars, really watched, noticed that certain constellations blinked out that night. Voss stood on the bridge of the lead cruiser, dressed in matte black command armor. Her insignia was old, almost mythical. She looked out at the stars and spoke to no one in particular. They think this is about death. Behind her, Grandma's voice replied softly. They'll learn it's about memory. Voss nodded. Let's teach. The first strike landed on a logistics hub in neutral space. No casualties, just darkness. One moment the depot bustled with activity. The next, every system was dead. No explosion. No fire. Just a whisper of power gone and a single message left behind in the data stream. Cradlefire Phase 1. No one had seen the fleet arrive. No weapons were detected. There were no witnesses. The Grivern called it sabotage. The Volari called it prophecy. But Voss called it calibration. On board the lead cruiser Inheritance of Ash, Voss stood at the center of a quiet storm. The bridge was dim, with only tactical projections casting light across her face. The ship didn't vibrate with its power, it hummed like a predator at rest. Grandma's voice chimed gently in her ear. Second target coming into range, dear. Do you want it gift-wrapped or decapitated? Gift-wrapped, she said. No casualties yet. They're still learning. Understood. I'll bring them cookies. A dozen vessels scattered through the black responded to silent orders. No radio chatter. No transmissions. Just encrypted vectors passed like old secrets. Voss tapped a key and brought up a visual of the next target, a Grivern cultural archive orbiting one of their oldest colonies. The kind of place that stored history, not weapons. Her voice when she spoke was cool. Don't destroy it, she said. Turn off the gravity generators. Seal the exits. Leave the lights on. And the heat, darling? No. Let them feel cold. Moments later, hundreds of Grivern curators floated helplessly within their own vault, staring through frost-tinted windows at the void. Outside, a single Terran beacon pulsed. Remember who we are. Briggs watched from his own cruiser, the Firebird's grin, shaking his head. You always were a bit theatrical, he muttered. Voss's voice came over the comm, level and unwavering. Theater is how you teach. Terror is how you remind them to stay awake. The galaxy was now wide awake. Diplomatic cables ignited across sectors. The Grivern tried to spin the attacks as rogue acts. The Volari refused to believe it. The Ctheli began evacuating their science stations without even being targeted, as if simply watching was dangerous. Admiral Chixta convened a council with no lights and only whispers. She isn't retaliating, he said. She's performing a eulogy with tactics. Meanwhile, civilian markets began stockpiling Earth-made products out of sheer superstition. Earth music surged in popularity. So did Earth War documentaries. On one colony, children played a new game called Voss Says. The rules were simple. If Voss said, duck, you ducked. If you didn't, you lost. Some cried. Most obeyed. The tide had turned. But Voss was not finished. Phase 3 commenced without warning. A ring of planetary defense satellites around Grivern's third moon turned in unison, not outward toward threats, but inward toward their own infrastructure. They fired once. Then shorted out. Another beacon broadcast, this time in their native language. Every system has a flaw. Even yours. Back on Earth, officials issued no statements. The planetary press operated under emergency silence protocols. Not because they were afraid, but because they knew silence was scarier. Inside her command chamber, Voss stood before the final map. It glowed red at the edges, encircling core territories untouched by prior strikes. Briggs's voice broke the momentary stillness. "They're calling for a ceasefire." "Of course they are. They say they'll grant full reparations. Land deeds. Military limitations. Even tech transfers." She said nothing. "They're scared, Voss. Really scared." She turned toward the screen, eyes focused. "Not scared enough." He approached slowly, arms folded. "Then what's enough?" "When they stop treating humanity like an accident." She paused. "When they realize we're a consequence." He leaned against the console, tone softening. "And after that? You ever think about what happens after?" "Yes," she said. "Afterward, they behave. Or they burn." The final target appeared on the map, a quiet planetoid used by the Grivern as a noble family retreat. No government installations. No high-ranking officials. Just legacy mansions, bloodlines, and symbols. Important only in culture, not command. Briggs narrowed his eyes. "You sure about this one?" She stared at the screen. "They thought those children were disposable because they didn't hold office. This will help them understand what that really means." The order was simple. Deorbit the moon. Grandma calculated the angles. It wouldn't kill anyone. The families had evacuation plans. But it would obliterate the estates, destroy the records, and scatter the ashes of 1,000 years into empty space. "You could have hit their government," Briggs said. "I didn't want compliance," Voss replied. "I wanted understanding. And I wanted them to feel what I felt. Powerless. Cold. Disrespected." He hesitated. "What would your boys have thought of this?" She looked down at her hands. "They'd have thought I was protecting the next children." Then she gave the command. "Execute cradle fire." Across 10 sectors, the final wave engaged. Cultural archives were erased. Ancestral symbols defaced. Every act surgical. Every strike symbolic. No one died. But every world screamed. And just as the fear hit its peak, everything stopped. No more attacks. No new beacons. Just silence. The Grivern government sent a desperate message. "We surrender. We accept full fault. We request diplomatic meeting to establish permanent peace terms." Voss stared at the message for a long moment. Briggs stood beside her, quiet. "They finally broke," he said. She didn't answer right away. Outside the ship, stars blinked like Morse code. The war, if it could be called that, was over. "Bring me the council," she said. "I want them to see me when I accept their apology." It was arranged within a day. The Grivern High Council met with her aboard a neutral Terran station. They arrived in full regalia, sashes, emblems, trembling limbs. The room was stark, empty but for a table, 2 chairs, and a recording drone hovering near the ceiling. Voss entered with no weapons, no armor. Just her voice, and a single item tucked under her arm. She sat opposite them, placed the object on the table. A small wooden block, singed along the edges. The same one they'd found on Verdant 3. She tapped it once. "You remember this?" They didn't answer. "2 names," she said. "Tommy. Leo. You killed them. Accident or not, irrelevant. You erased them." One counselor tried to speak. She raised a hand. "I'm not here for guilt. I'm here for clarity." She leaned forward. "I am the price of human grief." The silence was brittle. She gestured to the drone. "Transmit the following across every Grivern system." She stood. The block in her hand. "My name is Aelia Voss. I do not represent Earth. I do not act in its name. I acted in my own. If you ever harm our children again, any human child, I will return. And next time, I won't bring a lesson. I'll bring a conclusion." The drone clicked off. One of the counselors finally gathered the nerve to speak. "What do you want?" She considered it. "Fear." His breath caught. "And if we obey?" She smiled faintly. Then you'll survive. Back on the cruiser, Briggs leaned over a console, watching the playback. You think it worked? She's not a myth anymore, Grandma said. She's a memory. He looked out the viewport. Ships drifted like wolves waiting for permission to stand down. Guess we taught them what happens when you break a mother. No, Grandma replied. We reminded them. Voss returned to the orchard days later. The swing was still there. She sat on it, knees pulled up slightly, and stared at the sky. Her uniform was packed away again. No more flags. No more orders. A child ran across the field nearby. Someone else's son, laughing, chasing a drone like it was a balloon. She watched him go. Then she whispered their names again. Tommy. Leo. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she had to avenge them anymore. She had done what mothers do. She had taught the galaxy to fear the lullaby.